Welcome to Wednesdays with Willa. I am your host, Willa White, and this is my weekly podcast show that airs on Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern on my Facebook page, Willa White Medium. It also goes out on the YouTube channel, as well as Blog Talk Radio for the listen-only features. I encourage you to look at all of the shows that happen throughout the week. There are various hosts and topics that are covered. On my particular podcast, we focus on spiritualism, mediumship, healing, faith, family, and more. And it's always a delight to talk with various folks from all over the world. I encourage you to look back at the archive videos of the show. This is year 6. The end of year 6, actually, of Wednesdays with Willa. So you've got lots of archive material to go back and learn more about those things. And I am thrilled to have as my guest today, Karen Newell. Thanks for being on the show today, Karen.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Willa. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. I know a lot of people are excited about your upcoming visit to Lilydale. And for those of you who don't know who Karen Newell is, she is an author and a specialist in personal development. And you are the co-founder of Sacred Acoustics, which we're going to get into in just a little bit, about brainwave entrainment and how that can help people in their lives and in their spiritual development. And you're also the co-author of the book, Living in a Mindful Universe. And more thrilling for everybody who's coming to Lilydale this summer, you're going to be here for a special weekend on near-death experiences. I know you're going to be leading some workshops that'll be so beautiful to help people understand more about the near-death experience, but also how they can utilize brainwave entrainment to assist in their own spiritual development. So it's just be a great weekend. For those of you who haven't marked your calendars yet, you're going to want to come for July 14th, 15th, and 16th, because Karen and Dr. Eben Alexander, Raymond Moody, and Dr. Kerr, they're all going to be here. And it's going to be a fabulous weekend in Lilydale. I do have the ticket link posted to this video, so you can easily find the things that Karen's teaching this summer in Lilydale. So without further ado, let's dive into the topic of sacred acoustics. What is that? What happens when we do sacred acoustics?
Well, sacred acoustics are specialized audio recordings that contain binaural beats. And it's those binaural beats that make them different from regular music. And so what that means is binaural beats are when one signal is being fed into one ear, a slightly different signal to the other ear. And it's the difference between those two frequencies that deliver that brainwave entrainment to the brain. So it sounds like a wah, wah, wah sound. And if you're a fan of crystal bowls or brass bowls, gongs, or tuning forks, they all emit a natural binaural beat. And they're designed to help the brain get into a calmer state of awareness that is associated with different brainwave states that are found when measuring the brain's electrical signals with an EEG device. And we find that 0 to 4 hertz, that's when we're asleep. 4 to 7 hertz, that's the theta range associated with meditation, creativity, deep insight, potentially mediumship. And the alpha range is roughly 8 to 12 hertz associated with focus and concentration. It's above that 12 to 30 hertz. That's the beta state that we're in when we're walking, we're talking, and we want to get into quiet states. It's sometimes kind of challenging. And so those binaural beats help get us into those lower states, the theta, the alpha, and even the delta, sometimes to help people sleep. Our little sweet spot is that 4 hertz, that space between awake and asleep. And this is often where people can find their body becomes profoundly relaxed, but their mind is still aware. And this often creates sort of a foundation for meditative experiences or any type of altered states of awareness. Other people use them to just help them sleep or focus, but many, many applications that can be explored.
I can see how there would be so many benefits for people using this particular therapy, if we will. And with the acoustic beats that you're producing, there have to be, as they're generated, certain understandings within the people who are engineering this and then the listeners. So what are some of the optimum things that are going into not just the recipe of this, but then also what the listener needs to do for themselves?
Well, when every listener is unique, and that's because every single one of us has a unique brainwave signature. In fact, I learned that our brainwave is just as unique as a fingerprint. It can be used to identify people. That really surprised me. And so when we're listening to these types of recordings, it should be no surprise that we might respond a little differently. And the most common response is people find themselves getting very relaxed. I know my motivation for listening to these recordings, I had a very hard time meditating. I learned that it could be very helpful, help your immune response, help you relax, help with stress and so on. But every time I tried to meditate, I would just have this racing, thoughts going through my mind. So I thought, well, this isn't relaxing. And it was binaural beats that really helped me find that space. They really served as training wheels to help me identify sometimes these more subtle meditative states that many of us who aren't experienced may not even recognize when we're in those kind of states. And so people, when they listen, what I call passive listening, that's where you just put on those headphones. We do recommend listening with headphones because we're delivering left and right signals. So hearing both of those into each ear is rather important. But as you're listening, that passive listening is very, can be useful just to find out, how am I going to respond? Don't bring any intention into the experience. And anyone can find out for themselves by going to sacredacoustics.com, look for that free download prompt, enter your email, and we'll send you a link to a 20-minute download. Many people use this as their daily practice. And it's 20 minutes because that is kind of the standard minimum practice that is generally recommended for meditation. And so you can get started anytime. But listeners can also use their intention. And that is where you might have a particular personal goal. Say it's developing trust in your inner guidance, or it might be that you want to connect with a spirit guide or something like that. And so you can bring intention into your experience. And the way we recommend doing that is to really develop the feeling of what it is you'd like to receive once that intention has been fulfilled. And so you can also bring your literal mind into that, but it's a combination of both a statement and a feeling state that you can generate. And when in combination with these binaural beats while you're listening, it really is remarkable how this kind of attention to your inner world and bringing that focus and that inner peace can have such an effect on your outer world. And this is what many, many people, including myself, have experienced. And so there's really just, the sky's the limit. Sometimes I feel like I sound like a snake oil salesman when I say all of the potential benefits that these recordings might have. But if you go to our testimonial page on sacredacoustics.com, you'll see the vast variety of ways that people benefit from listening. And so I don't want to put any limits on people for what might be possible, just depending on your personal and spiritual goals.
Mm-hmm. And it's nice that you are making that statement that it's about the intention the individual brings to the experience. And yet there is no expectation. There's an acceptance that's going on in those moments. And meditation is like that. You go into a state of acceptance and a state that is beyond the thinking mind and activates on, as you said, the emotional side, the spiritual understanding, the essence of that individual. And it does come down to vibrational frequency. As a medium, when I connect with spirit, it's about connecting with that particular vibrational frequency. And so it makes sense to me that using music or acoustics in this case would activate different zones within a person, and that you can specifically guide yourself using these methods into a state of acceptance and a state of receptivity to those spiritual realms, those spiritual experiences, be they mediumship or healing or whatever positive thing you're trying to affect within your life. So you have different meditations that are geared toward different things. And about how many meditations do you have at this point?
Oh, we have a couple dozen, and yes, they are geared towards different things. We have recordings specifically designed to focus on the heart, for example, and different ways of breathing in and out of the heart. We have one called Light Body, where people can really focus on that energetic part of themselves, you know, beyond the physical body. Some people, when they listen to this recording Light Body, they even have hints of, or even full blown out of body experiences. So that's another kind of direction that people can go. What's really interesting is that, you know, when we talk about these expanded states of awareness, and our weekend in Lilydale is going to be focused on near-death experiences. And there's something that I'll be talking about at this workshop called the Grayson scale. And this is something that Dr. Bruce Grayson developed back in the 70s and 80s. He's a psychiatrist who started hearing stories from his patients that couldn't be explained. And he eventually realized that these patients who had these kind of experiences, which were termed near-death experiences, people who got close to death, but also had these other kind of features. And so he wanted to figure out what these features were, simply because of the transformative effects that he observed. He found that people who'd had near-death experiences had amazing transformations in their beliefs, in their understandings of the world, and it changed them in a way that psychiatrically he hadn't seen such powerful responses. And so that's what interested him in learning what were the features of these near-death experiences. Could they be duplicated so that others could experience the same kind of transformation? And that's where it's so interesting, because there's 16 features on this scale, and they involve the same kinds of things that can happen when you're in meditative states and sacred acoustics recording. So one category is your cognitive state is affected. So time might seem to speed up or slow down. You might find that your thoughts quiet. And that's these kinds of features can be found when listening to our recordings. And of course, other meditative techniques as well. But another is emotional, the affective category, people feeling this amazing sense of joy and connectivity. People will have paranormal types of activities happen where they sense spirit guides, or maybe even sometimes a religious figure. And then there's another category, the transcendental category, and that's where people feel like they've gone to another world. And all of these types of features can be experienced when listening to our recordings. And that's what's so amazing. And we've watched people listen during workshops, and they have these experiences right there in front of us, and they come out transformed, just like a near-death experience. Now, I want to caution that we're not necessarily having the same full-blown hyper reality that a near-death experiencer might have, but just by tapping into these kinds of features, we're able to have similar types of transformation. And so even a hint of what happens during a near-death experience can be quite valuable. And I know I have, when I look at that Grayson scale, during meditation, I have, I don't know if I would say duplicated, I've experienced many, if not all of the features on that list, but not necessarily all at once. And that's where, when you're having a near-death experience, at least 7 of those 16 features are present in order for it to be termed a valid, meaningful near-death experience. So keep that in mind as we're going through all of this. But all of us, we don't need to have a near-death experience in order to discover what they discover, that we are primarily spiritual beings living in a physical body, that there is absolute deep meaning and purpose to our existence. They come back feeling as though there's a reason that they're here. And many of us who haven't had that experience, we have that same wondering, why are we here? What is our purpose? And by getting into these expanded states of awareness, we can start to find those things and bring benefits into our own lives. And what really excites me the most is about this weekend that we're going to be experiencing at Lilydale is that I get to meet Dr. Christopher Kerr. And he is someone that is a little more new to this field. In fact, he works as a hospice doctor in Buffalo, New York. He's the director of Hospice Buffalo. And he, a while back, decided to study what happens during actual death. Many people talk about it, all of these things. Oh, grandma is seeing her mom who died, 30 years ago. How could this be? And many of us think they're just hallucinations. But how interesting that Dr. Kerr has discovered what happens at actual death actually lines up with the features of near-death experiences. And so this is what excites me so much. People ask us, how do we know if what happens during near-death experiences actually is what happens when we die? And Dr. Kerr's work is confirming, yes, we can absolutely trust those near-death experiences as what actually happens when we die. And there's no reason to wait until we die to find out. Having that information here and now helps inform how we live our lives here and now, gives us a better understanding of the eternity of our souls, our loved ones' souls, how love is the binding force that connects us all. And that, again, we don't have to wait until we die to find out this information. And this is the biggest message that Eben and I'm sure Raymond Moody and Dr. Kerr want to bring to people is, not necessarily what happens when we die, but how that information helps us live our lives more fully here and now.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful. And Dr. Kerr is going to be a guest on the show soon too, so you can look forward to kind of meeting him in advance to seeing him in person here in Lilydale too. It's going to be great to have him tell more about his findings and about that process. And I really appreciate the fact that you're helping people to have transformation without trauma. So that's what I get from this. I get that understanding that you don't have to go to the brink of death. You don't have to, almost die or die to be able to taste a bit of what that's like, but without the trauma, the connection, so that you can know that that which is heavenly realm, sacred, spiritual realm is within you, and that you can access many parts of that in the here and now and bring that heaven here to earth, shall we say.
I love your phrase, transformation without trauma. That's very good. But I will caution, I went through something myself that once I first started to meditate, I started to discover things inside of me that I had conveniently suppressed long ago. Feelings of abandonment, for example, when my parents were divorced at age 7, I had just hidden all of that away and thought I was completely well adjusted. And yet I learned when I began that meditative practice, oh my goodness, I have some baggage that I need to clear. And this baggage is affecting, my relationships here and now. And so often when people go into these meditative practices, they might find themselves going through potentially a dark night of the soul, where, at some point in their spiritual growth, they must face something about themselves that isn't so comfortable. And once you face that uncomfortable part of yourself, that's where that transformation comes in. So you say we don't have to have a near-death experience, but many people go through what is termed an ego death experience.
That's true.
Not as traumatic physically, but it can feel quite traumatic emotionally for some of us. And it's funny, our own traumas always seem so much worse than everyone else. If I explained my psychological trauma to someone, they might think, well, that's kind of silly. But, it's our visceral trauma that we must work through. And that's another gift of meditation that can seem uncomfortable at first. And some people, we've found, especially with our recordings, that it seems to activate emotions that are already in your system. And this can be disconcerting for some. But the rewards after kind of going through that, Eben and I often say there's no way out but through. You can't really go around or spiritually bypass some of that stuff that might be in you. But I will tell you, the rewards for going through that are just absolutely unbelievable. You end up really absorbing more of who you really are beyond that maybe psychological trauma that you had, where you suppressed some of that light within. And so it gives you an opportunity to sort of reconnect with that light of who you truly are and bring that gift to this world.
Beautiful. Yes, yeah, it can stir up the mud, as it were, but then
Yeah.
it's an opportunity to really and truly clear and have a true release or forgiveness. And that's beautiful in and of itself. And that you don't have to necessarily relive every aspect of perceived trauma in that sense, but you can transform and release that which had happened in the past and step more into the moment of the now. And I think it does speak to a bit of that shadow self that people have to understand, as Debbie Ford brought to the table so many years ago, this understanding of that shadow self, that you have to meet that self when you are alone with your own thoughts, and usually in meditation. And that happens in such a beautiful way if we let it. That metamorphosis of the butterfly. There's a reason why everybody loves butterflies. It's because we understand that they've been through things, but the metamorphosis leaves them in such glory. And that's what a true practice can lead you toward more and more. And in your experience with the sacred acoustics that you're using, have you noticed what's happened to people? There's an arc that occurs within them, and then once they've gotten past that issue that they needed to resolve on a mind, body level, spirit level, then what happens next for them?
Well, usually they're able to live with more purpose, to feel more connected to their higher soul, to their grander journey of existence. They have a bigger perspective of why they are here and what's going on. So they realize that, things that make them upset are related to what's inside them, and that the external world merely serves as a trigger for something that they need to resolve within. And they really stop blaming the outer world, and they start to accept ownership and really become empowered with their own spirit and the power that their spirit really has to sort of guide and manage their lives as it's unfolding. And it is a remarkable thing to see. And some people will have these kind of experiences almost immediately. Some are seem to be wired for just any kind of trigger will send them into an experience. And then there's the other extreme, people who have tried everything, trying to have some semblance of some kind of spiritual, mystical experience. And then all the people in between. And it's quite interesting to see people go through it. And so those who have a little harder time, sometimes I tell them, and I was one of those people, I had a harder time really kind of catalyzing these inner world experiences. And this is because I had an expectation of how they would show up. And I didn't trust the subtle sort of signals that were happening. And once I learned how to do all of that, then my experiences really began to evolve. And some people, it takes them 18 to 24 months of regular practice before they start to see really significant types of experiences. And this is how it was for me. It took about 18 to 24 months and lots of frustration as I was, on that pathway of how I wanted things to appear to me, and then really learning how to accept how things appear to me. And that's part of the process, is really learning. You said it earlier, you set your intention, but then you have to balance that with your expectation and develop that trust that the universe or your higher soul or what have you is helping, is playing a role, and is really your partner, your co-creator in all of this. And establishing that connection, that foundation, is really important for all of us, no matter what your personal goals are, that foundation of knowing yourself as a soul, as an eternal soul, is really the food, the juice for all that can come after. So, and it's also like some would say, I know it was for me, like peeling layers of an onion. Say you get through that one trauma and you think, oh, wow, this is fabulous. I feel great. And then you notice, oh my goodness, there's another one. Or maybe that one wasn't completely cleared, but each time it gets a little easier and a little more obvious. And for me, I've developed this, and all of us can do this, what we call the inner observer, or the soul's perspective. This is another part of you that can kind of observe from a neutral perspective as you're going through an emotional response. And meditation really taught me how to have that third party kind of ability to watch myself go through my different emotions. And that's been incredibly helpful, because that same aspect of myself can also kind of feed me clues in a contentious moment of how I might shift my behavior in order to get a better outcome. And, you know, this reminds me of that life review in near-death experiences, that when people, and it also happens, it begins during actual death, as Dr. Kerr will share, that we begin to start to review our lives. And this is a learning tool. It helps us learn how our behaviors affected others in our lifetimes. And that's when we start to make decisions during that life review. Oh gosh, what could I have done better and potentially do differently next time around? And that speaks a bit to this reincarnation, that we come back again and again to get it right. And it's our own sort of soul that makes that judgment. And so that has prompted me to do what I call a daily review or a weekly review, or whenever something kind of where I'm in a situation where I'm not necessarily proud of my behavior. Maybe I regret something that I said, or something like that. I'll go into a daily review where I get into a contemplative state and I imagine, how might that other person have felt due to my behaviors? And not how can that person change in the future, but how can I change myself in a future situation, or make amends even from something that might have happened. That's a daily review. So why wait until the end of your lives to really reckon with different things that you might have done differently? Let's do it as we go along. And that's one way we can bring these features of near-death experiences into our daily lives to really make a difference here and now.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing about that. It is, you eloquently stated what happens when we go into that mode of self-knowledge, that self-awareness, and that we do have personal responsibility. As spiritualists, we understand and believe and trust in spiritual natural law. And one of those laws is law of personal responsibility. You can't get away from it. It's yours, no one else's. And that comes to the forefront when you're wanting to do spiritual development, even when you're not wanting to do spiritual development, it comes to the forefront. And once you have that awareness, you start to move more into self-mastery. And so that's the next phase that people are wanting to get to, but it's not something that happens necessarily instantly or spontaneously for most. It has to happen through a process. And as you said, you're uncovering different aspects of yourself, things that you didn't get a chance to really look at in a particular way, that you're able to review them with perhaps more objectivity, more light, more empathy for yourselves and for others. And that's something that is valuable, so valuable and crucial in that spiritual journey. So as people are moving through that process and into self-mastery, they can move through those judgments. Have you noticed that there is a recognition within them that they need certain sacred acoustic meditations during certain phases, and then as they progress? So do you have this mapped out for people in that particular way, or do you just find that they gravitate to where they're supposed to initially?
Well, it's both. Some people really want a structure. They want to be told a system that worked for someone else in the past, and they want to follow that system. And other people, they want to use their own intuition. They want to feel their connection to a recording, or maybe there's one that really captures their attention. And so we have no strict rules. And I know when I was exploring other types of binaural beat audio recordings before we created Sacred Acoustics, there were a lot of rules. And even in meditation, there are many rules, how you're supposed to sit, how you're supposed to hold your posture, and all of these different rules. And I know those rules were created as a system that worked for someone else. And so now we're duplicating that system. And I encourage people to, when I was learning those different systems, many of them did not work for me. And if I tweaked a little bit, I would go, oh, well, maybe breathe this way instead of that way. I would like, oh, now I'm getting the results that they're speaking of. And so I encourage people to really find what works best for them. And so we do have some suggested places for people to start. And I will mention the Whole Mind Bundle, because that set of recordings was used in a busy psychiatric practice in New York City about 5 years ago. And Dr. Anna Yusum prescribed these recordings to her existing patients. And she found that after 2 weeks of listening using the state trait anxiety inventory, that they had a 26% reduction in anxiety. And she found it was more their trait anxiety that improved. So the anxiety that they walk around with in the world, and not just situational anxiety, that's what was improving. So she found this to be quite remarkable and was able to get that published in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease. And that's when we made those recordings available to everyone. It was February of 2020, if everyone remembers. That's right before all of the lockdowns and all of the anxiety around the world started really setting in due to the COVID pandemic. And so those recordings were already available, but I drastically reduced their price, and I made a free option for anyone who's experiencing anxiety. You can go try out those recordings with no financial barrier. That is still the case. I still allow those to be acquired at no cost, with no questions asked. And these recordings, though, are not just useful for reducing anxiety. They can help you sleep. They can help you study. And that theta recording is one that's often used to get into those that hypnagogic state. So many people are familiar with hypnosis, where a hypnotherapist, or even using self-hypnosis, you can get into this expanded sort of altered state of awareness. That's that hypnagogic state. And right around 4 hertz, as I mentioned earlier, the space between awake and asleep, we can get into that hypnagogic state, that theta state. And so even with that Whole Mind Bundle, you can get into these states, and really just the sky's the limit. Now, beyond the Whole Mind Bundle, there's the Whole Heart Bundle, the Whole Spirit Bundle. So there is a little pathway if someone wants to follow that. But again, we encourage people to mix and match based on their personal spiritual goals and other practices you might have. I encourage you to kind of incorporate those practices while you're listening. And I know that's not advised by some, say, transcendental meditation teachers, but then I know others who have, used their transcendental meditation mantra while listening to our recordings, and they find themselves having different kinds of experiences. And so that's why I encourage people to really experiment, use some trial and error. I expect many of your listeners already have dozens, if not more, of meditative techniques that are tried and true. And so many longtime meditators, just as a disclaimer, find that our recordings get in their way because they already have their techniques all established. And yet other longtime meditators will say that our recordings help them go deeper, or to areas, or tune into zones, as you were saying, that maybe weren't so easy to tune into before. And so again, we're all different, and really just finding your own path, developing your own way through those personal goals that you have. Now, because you're a medium, Willa, I'm going to assume that many of your listeners are interested in connecting with the
Yes.
souls of their departed loved ones. And that is another common goal that our listeners have. And so we do recommend using our suggested intention method of creating that feeling of what it was like to be with that person, that loving bond that you shared. And as you go into that meditation while listening to these recordings, we recommend that people generate that feeling. And of course, depending on whatever level of grief you're at, that may be more challenging for some than others. But then you just kind of let that go and allow and wait to see what happens. And people will have many, many different things happen. They might have a brush of a touch on their shoulder or their cheek. They might actually feel a little kiss on their cheek or something like that. Others might have a memory or a vision of their loved one when they were very young, very vibrant. We call that, appearing in their light body, that ideal appearance of who they were here on earth, that you would recognize them as their most vibrant. And, there's many, many different ways for loved ones to show up. Sometimes it doesn't happen during the listening session, and that's okay too. Sometimes if you're paying attention, that loved one may show up in a dream or in another situation. I've also studied after-death communication, and the research on that is quite fascinating. It's a little bit different from mediumship because after-death communication, they are defined as completely spontaneous. And it seems to be more the loved one, the departed loved one's soul, who makes the effort to connect with the person that is still here. But many of us who might be presented with such a vision might be so shocked that, it might be very fleeting. And so if we can prepare ourselves for these kinds of things to happen, that can be very useful. And so using intention can play some role in helping to minimally let your loved one know that you're open and available to that connection. And it really seems to depend on that loved one's ability to also make the effort to come forward. And I'm sure as a medium, you understand the different abilities that souls develop on the other side. And some are more adept at making appearances than others. And this was actually very shocking to me when I read the rather modern research on after-death communication, that I think it's something like 60% of these after-death communications, or ADCs, are full-blown visions, as if they look like they looked when they were alive, not murky, not shadowy. Some are, but a vast majority of these, around 60%, are full-blown visions of people. So what a wonderful gift when this occurs. And it can happen when you're awake or when you're asleep. And so pay attention in your dream space and don't discount when you have a dream about your loved one. I remember my daughter, she lost her father. We were divorced when she was very young, but she lost her father in her 20s. And she was very, very upset about all of this because they had a lot of unresolved issues. And she regretted, she hadn't tried to resolve some of those issues before he died. And, I encouraged her to just remember her loving bond with him that she felt, and not the bad stuff. Just remember those good things as you're falling asleep at night. And eventually she was rewarded with a beautiful connection with a dream and many other synchronicities that absolutely convinced her that he is still with us. And what was so interesting, it was just about a year ago now. He died maybe 10 years ago, but it was just in the last year, a few months ago, actually, that my daughter let me know she had another dream about Daddy, as she calls him. And she said that he came to her home where she's living now, and he was walking around the home and she was showing him around. And he said to her, I faked my death. I'm really not dead. And she told me this, and she thought, well, we both know he had this very dry kind of sense of humor, always making these kind of jokes, very dry and some sarcastic. And when that's what she thought he was doing, just making a sarcastic joke. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's letting you know that he's not really dead. And this is a common message from after-death communications. I'm still here. I'm okay. I still love you. We'll meet again. Those kind of messages. So for him making that joke in her dream, that's how I interpreted that. And every personality who has left us and is on the other side will bring that personality to those after-death communications. And that can really be quite valid. And so some of us, we're waiting for those kinds of experiences to take place. And I just encourage you to open and be open to those kinds of experiences. And of course, seeing a medium as a facilitator is another beautiful way to begin to make that connection. So this is, using intention can be very frustrating when it comes to connecting with a loved one, because there's two parties involved. And, that other party needs to also be playing a role. And so it's important too, not to feel, hurt feelings because your loved one isn't reaching out. It may just be they don't have that ability yet. And so, hang in there.
Oh, that's a beautiful message. People need that reminder that, it is a two-way street, and, they're having to learn the ropes too. I've had really effective spirit communicators that were just wonderful communicators when they were here on the earth plane. Mediums that have passed, they're excellent, easy. And then you have other people, it's like, I don't understand what I'm doing. You could feel it from spirit. So
right.
yes,
And that
be
isn't
patient.
isn't that when you start to get all those weird symbols because they don't know how to communicate? And then you have to say, there's like this red ball, and I don't know. And then the client is like, oh my God, the red ball, right?
Right. And you're just like, it's almost like they're just like, I'm thinking I can press that key. Yeah, that key. And that'll give you that information. And so yes, it's just timing is everything.
And I have to imagine
understand
it takes a lot of energy, I imagine, to create a full-blown apparition of yourself in the physical world. And so
because they don't have a body anymore.
Right. And so it's not necessarily easy. I know when I was practicing out-of-body experience, one of the most significant memories I have was when I managed to get out of my body, but I couldn't go through walls. In fact, I could barely walk. I was holding myself up against the wall, trying to go down some stairs. And I thought that was hilarious. And I thought, oh, I just don't know how to I feel limited in my spirit body. So I'm not quite fully free of my limitations. So how interesting.
Yeah, it's like it's like being a landlubber, and you're finally on the boat and you're figuring out how to deal with the rocking. And then it's also the reverse. So you're used to being on the boat and you come onto land, all of a sudden, you have your sea legs, but you don't have your land legs anymore.
That's that reminds me of the humans who say, I don't really feel human. I don't feel comfortable here. And that may be exactly what you just said, part of that adjustment.
And also I've noticed that for those folks, it's because they're not all in their body. You got to make sure all your arms and legs are in the vehicle before you proceed, because they're just not all locked in there yet. And so then they kind of feel that they're kind of leaky around their edges, as it were. It's not a nice big full aura connection.
Right. Would you say they're still sort of more present as their spiritual self, and they need to get more of that energy into the physical body?
Yes, to be grounded in this physical body and to enjoy it. And I think that's the big lesson for everyone, is to enjoy the time that we have here on this earth plane, and learn from the experiences that we have and the experiences other people have too. And that's why, Dr. Alexander sharing his story about his near-death experience, and Dr. Kerr, sharing about many other people's experiences for end of life, and just all the stories that people are able to feel the truth in, and then they are able to glean more understanding in their own life. And I can see how you're helping to facilitate it. I know when Dr. Alexander was on the show recently, he talked about how your particular meditation acoustic program, brainwave entrainment, was very similar to his NDE in terms of replicating that. And I think it's amazing that it's just about attuning yourself to the appropriate vibrational frequency. And as soon as you're there, you've got it.
Yeah. And he had that reference point, and that's
Yeah.
what I told him. And yeah, well, he knew naturally. I didn't have to tell him that, but he will say that he's not returned to the very hyper reality that he experienced during his NDE, but that's not necessary to experience the transformative effects. And yeah, he does continue that. And you know, it's really interesting. When I first met Eben, I knew he had had a near-death experience, but his book wasn't out. I didn't know the story. And I'd known others who'd had near-death experiences. So for me, it wasn't new. I knew, though, that people came back usually with these very profound personal lessons. So I wanted to cut right to that. And I said, what was your lesson? What was the lesson that you came back with? And he says, the brain doesn't create consciousness. And I was confused. I said, well, why would anyone think that it does? And that's what you learned. And so that showed how we were kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum. But
Yeah.
I said, well, what about the love? This is what most people talk about. You know, he was a neurosurgeon, a scientist. So of course, the science of it all, that's the most revolutionary thing for him, is how it changed really not only his worldview, but the whole worldview of materialist science has just flipped on its end because of his experience. That's what he was so excited about. But I was thinking, what about the love? That's what Dr. Kerr will say is on everyone's mind as they're getting close to death. And we know this. That's when that love comes up. When we lose someone, when we find out we have a terminal diagnosis, that's when that love becomes so important. That's what near-death experiencers touch by far when they go to the other side and bring back that feeling of that love. And so I'm like, Eben, what about the love? And he says, oh yeah, the love.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
You know, and as a medium, one of my favorite parts of being a medium is I can feel the love that the
Yes,
loved ones in spirit have for the recipient, the client, and it's thrilling.
yeah.
It's a vicarious thrill if there ever was one. The love that starts to course through me because I'm able to feel what they can feel, and then when the client and recipient, they're also feeling it, and it's just like a room of love.
That's why we call it the binding force of love, and to feel that feeling of your loved one, you know, not what they look like in conversations, but that feeling state of that love that you shared. And how interesting, though, Eben told me, you can't really bring that love back here. It's too powerful, though. That's just for when you die. And I was like, au contraire, my friend.
That's
I said,
right.
I said, no. I've touched that love. I've done it through meditative practice. And so I've learned, you know, something called Sufi heart rhythm meditation. There's many kinds of ways to do this, but focusing your breathing, moving in and out of the heart. And I actually combined that with our heart presence recording, that type of breathing. But Eben said, you know, I said, well, so you felt that love. Now, how about, do you love yourself? And he said, you know, I don't feel worthy of love. And I'm like, wait a minute, you felt this. This is what near-death experiencers bring back. And he says, well, that feeling of being adopted, I don't know if he spoke about that, but when he was adopted, he was with his mother. His mother would visit him, his biological mother, and at age 4 months, she signed off, and he didn't see her anymore. And so he felt this vacuous hole of, you know, not being loved. And while he was adopted into a wonderful family and so on, there's that feeling, that visceral feeling he had as an infant was still with him as an adult, even after that amazing experience when he was told how he was deeply loved and cherished forever. And so that's when I started to encourage him to use that reference point. Yes, if God can love you, if that force can love you, why can't you love yourself? And so I did assist him with. He went into meditation. He would generate those feelings of love. And over time, it took some time, he was able to get through that and realize he was worthy of love. And I said, how come I can love you? How can I can love you like this, but you can't love yourself? This, of course you're worthy, and we finally got there. The intellectual talking only did so much. He had to generate those feelings. He had to find that reference point and move past the linguistic brain to really get to that feeling state. And we can all do this. Adopted kids all around the world talk to us, are drawn to Eben's story because they feel that lack of love too, even when they have these beautiful, loving families who take them in. Not every adopted child has that wonderful benefit, but even those who do still have that feeling of lack. And so we can regenerate that ourselves by connecting to that spiritual sense. And once we're in that sort of spiritual sense, there's no way that love isn't present and available to all of us.
It's so beautiful that people can increase their emotional intelligence.
Absolutely.
They can, absolutely. And it's a little bit like lifting weights. You have to build up. Certain people, they're like, no, I don't know if I can trust that this is gonna work until they're in it. They really haven't understood about unconditional love that's available to them. And people have that illusion of separation from God, from the divine source. And once they realize that they are always, always deeply loved, and that law of love exists throughout this universe and connects us all in this beautiful web of existence, then they have it. And
Yeah.
I'm glad that you're his friend.
Well, when we met, there was no denying there was a connection. And I think when many of us, we meet people that we're spiritually connected to, it means that we've known each other before we were in these bodies. And so it's wonderful to kind of, at first it's a little nerve-wracking. It's I know my head was no, 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 no. And my heart was yes, 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 yes. And very challenging sometimes to reckon with these spiritual connections. Sometimes they come up in situations where it's not necessarily practical and helpful. And yet those spiritual connections, you just can't deny them. So powerful.
And knowing that the two of you are soulmates that are part of that same soul group helps immensely, so that you can work together so beautifully, and not just write books, but do workshops like you'll be doing this summer, and knowing that love exists and you're able to tap into it is such a supportive tool as you move forward in your own life. It's just it's a confirmation of love that's present. The universe will have people come into your life that'll show up and be spiritual family to you and help you along the way, if you accept them.
Yes. And allowing is sometimes the hardest thing. Sometimes the hardest thing. So.
Oh, well, this has been beautiful. Any last thoughts about sacred acoustics, near death, all of those great topics before we close for today?
Well, I would just say that it's really our birthright to know ourselves as eternal souls. And Dr. Kerr knows that our souls continue when we leave these physical bodies. And so having that knowledge now, it is truly our birthright. We don't have to wait until we die. And so anyone around the world, we always say no soul left behind. Any listener or anyone else who takes the time to find themselves, to know yourself as a soul, to release those non-beneficial energies, to bring more of who you are into this world. Anyone who does that, please accept my gratitude for doing your part to help all of us in this grander evolution of not only our individual souls, but the collective souls of all humanity and all of consciousness. We are all a very important part of the whole. And so taking the time to do that is a beautiful, wonderful thing that I thank you for.
Beautiful. That's powerful. I think people are going to really nibble on those words after you've said, when you hear certain phrases and then you nibble on them later on, because they come into your consciousness as things that assist you in a particular space in your life, or just uplift you and inspire you to be in that place of the more. the place that exists in great abundance of love. So thank you so much for coming on the show today, Karen. It's been wonderful to have you here and to share about sacred acoustics. And just as a reminder for folks, Karen Newell and all the other great folks that are coming for the Near Death Experience weekend, you're going to want to be here for July 14th, 15th, and 16th. You can register online through the lilydaleassembly.org website. I also have linked it in this post, so if you want to click on all the different ones that Karen's part of, that'll be available for you to access easily so that you can join in and see Karen in person. This has been great to have her with us today, but honestly, there's nothing better than being in the presence of people that have joy and carry light in their souls and are sharing it with others. So thank you again for being here, Karen, and thank you everyone for tuning in today. I'll see you next week for another great show of Wednesdays with Willa. All right, everyone. Bye-bye.